Hello, everyone. Today we'll be discussing Art Deco.
Yeah, I'm really excited for this topic. It's a big one. But before we get started, I just want to mention that I started a Substack. So that was something I've actually been planning for a long time, like even before Joseph departed. I just wanted to get more writing out there because so far my body of work in regards to silent generation, it's all audio. So I published 2 articles on generational colors, and then there's going to be one coming out, around when this episode comes out on the Vatican Library. And it's called North and Pulaski.
Yeah, first off, congrats. It's very exciting. It's cool to read.
Thank you.
But why is it called North and Pulaski?
That's the name of an intersection in Chicago that is really special. For some reason, it has like this little sign dedicating the intersection, and like the built environment around this particular intersection is really overbuilt in a certain way. So anyway, I'm going to write an article eventually on the concept of the urban interior, as well as like another smaller article on that particular intersection. So that's why it has the name. But also it's just like very Chicago. I mean, I'm a North Sider. And then Pulaski, that name I really associate with the city, like with Pulaski Day and things like that.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah. So why are we doing an episode on Art Deco? So last week's episode was on early skyscrapers. This one we're going to talk a bit about architecture, but I don't want to talk about that exclusively. But I think this one will tie in nicely because the last early skyscrapers were Art Deco skyscrapers.
Right. Yeah. While there were some neoclassical or Beaux Arts buildings being built in the U.S. in the 1930s, like the 30th Street Station in Philadelphia, the most prominent style for these grand structures at the time were Art Deco.
Yeah. Because Art Deco, the time period, it's between the end of World War I and 1918, and then the start of World War II. And so it's really, say, prominent in the 20s and 30s. And they really perfected the form of skyscrapers by the time Art Deco rolled around. And I'm excited because, now that I'm working with a new co-host, I can kind of revisit some of the subtopics that Joseph and I briefly addressed as part of other episodes I did with him. Like, we did an episode way back, our 5th episode on Interwar Modernism. And Interwar Modernism, they were the first design styles that were considered modern. So things like Streamline Modern, Bauhaus, Deutscher Werkbund, and the International style. And we talked about Art Deco a little bit as part of that. But Art Deco, I mean, it's such a big topic. And now I can revisit it with you with like sort of fresh takes.
Yeah, Art Deco is also just so popular and I feel like has had more revisions throughout history than the other ones. So it definitely stands out and it is more of a household name than the other ones. Is Art Deco your favorite of these interwar styles?
I mean, I would actually say probably Streamline Modern is because it's such a hidden gem. A lot of Streamline Modern styles get mistaken as Art Deco. Like, for example, do you know the Mercury train?
Yeah. It looks like the Iron Giant or something on rails.
Yeah, it's this really cool train that it has like, it has like this singular, not headlight, but the light on the front of the train. It just looks super Art Deco, or I guess Streamline Modern. But yeah, I see it posted all over the internet all the time. But that's Streamline Modern. So I think that style's underappreciated. But do you have a favorite of the 5?
It probably is Art Deco. I mean, it's just so special and we'll get to it, but it feels so American, even if it maybe didn't have the origins here. But the whole umbrella of interwar modernism is just like one of my favorite topics in aesthetic history. It really encapsulates like that feeling of, in between the old world, the new worlds, and I probably talk about it too much, but just when you have like a picture from that time, it looks like it could be modern, but all the people look out of place if it were to be a modern image. I find it really fun.
I mean, interwar modernism, it's just so classy. Like, if you were into it back then or today, and you know about, say, Adolf Loos, like, you're a very educated person.
Right.
Do you follow that Instagram account, though, Interwar Modernism?
I think I did, but I think they were posting weird AI stuff at some point. Or maybe it was a different offshoot one. Okay. Maybe not the one. I was definitely following an interwar modernism account at some point.
Yeah. I mean, it's cool you're already familiar with it.
Yeah.
But to get back to Art Deco, so where did the word come from? So the term originally arose amongst art dealers and antiques dealers sort of organically. They can't trace exactly who said it first. And then it started to appear in print in 1966, but it was really this one book, Art Deco of the 20s and 30s by Bevis Hillier. That was published in 1968, and that was what really solidified the term Art Deco, because prior to that, people would throw around terms like art moderne or the vertical style, and he was the one who said that Art Deco was the most, like, the best fitting term. He also solidified the years of its relevance, and then he collected all of these images that were examples of the style. Do you know the podcast Nymphet Alumni?
You definitely mentioned them a lot on the podcast, but I don't listen to them personally.
Yeah, I don't listen to them anymore, but they did do an episode with Evan Collins, the founder of Kari, and they interviewed him, and one of the things that he had mentioned was that he has a predecessor in Bevis Hillier. So you know what Evan Collins does? He collects all these images, he groups them together.
Right.
He then identifies them, gives them names. And that's basically what Bevis Hillier did, where he was collecting all of these images of Art Deco and then published, the very first seminal work on it. And Art Deco is actually kind of a consumer aesthetic. That's something Evan Collins said. Yeah. I don't want to talk about it as an aesthetic. I'd rather talk about it as a design style.
Right.
But it was commercially popular in this way that no other art or design style really had been before.
For sure. It's so much associated with the image of the Roaring 20s, and I feel like it maybe became a consumer aesthetic later on, trying to reach back to that time, with cigarette cases and stuff like that. But
yeah. No, it was during Art Deco's actual period of relevance too, because you could buy say a radio that was in an Art Deco style.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But as for Art Deco's history, it originated in France just prior to World War I. It was influenced by Cubism, Futurism, and the Vienna Secession. The Vienna Secession being a movement of Austrian artists that removed themselves visually, and it's seen as adjacent to Art Nouveau.
Yeah. It's really interesting to look at work from the Vienna Secession because it was an art movement I really wasn't familiar with before this week. But it's kind of like looking at the ancestor, in a phylogenetic tree, like a tree of life, where, you look back and you can see the traits of, all of the offshoots in the ancestor.
Yeah.
It's sort of this amorphous mix of, say, Art Nouveau, Art Deco, Streamline Moderne. It has all of these traits, but they're not really, clear. You can kind of see all of them at once.
For sure. My mom had her apartment when I was growing up was very 2000s Paris themed. It feels like it was very almost felt like Friends or something. She had a Eiffel Tower lamp and Gustav Klimt paintings on the wall, and Klimt is one of the Vienna Secession.
He's in it.
Right, yeah. And I guess as a kid, I never knew about that movement at all, but maybe it just keened my eye towards that. The second I saw the term Vienna Secession, I feel like I knew exactly what it was talking about.
Yeah. The name, when I first read it, I was succession or secession of, a state or something. It sounds very political.
Yeah, it does.
But it's actually named after this particular building, the Secession Building. Did you take a look at that one?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. It was the headquarters for the movement. So they would display their art there and collaborate. That was where they would work together. And that particular building, it looks kind of Art Deco because it has setbacks. Mm-hmm. But then all of the painted decorations, motifs on the outside, those are very Art Nouveau.
Okay. Is it the one with the big gold dome on the top? Yeah, that's so weird.
Such a bizarre. Dome is strange.
Yeah, it feels maybe Middle Eastern in some way, or I don't know. But, Art Deco had started out as largely graphics before that it moved into architecture, centered around symmetry and geometric forms and patterns.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of explains why Bevis Hillier's book, it had a lot of images of the graphic arts. It focused much less on architecture than I would have expected. Because our approach, even though we're kind of trying not to focus too much on architecture, our Pinterest board we made, it's still mostly architecture.
Yeah.
It's just so good.
I tried to go back and add more posters, but it really, the way we view it now is architecture. Yeah. And Joseph Hoffman's stocklit palace in Brussels. It was finished in 1911. It can kind of be viewed as a prototype of sorts to the architectural style.
Yeah. It's classified squarely as being in the secession style,
Right.
but you can kind of see how it is the predecessor of it because it has all of these really nice setbacks. It has this it's really the spire at the top. I don't know if that's functional or what it's for, but that's what really makes it look like it.
Yeah, the spire almost looks like Frank Lloyd Wright stained glass. Like it has all these geometric forms. They're very vertical, very rectilinear.
Mm-hmm.
It's very satisfying, and it doesn't. But yeah, it isn't Art Deco yet. It's kind of moving towards that.
Yeah. To me, it looks a lot more just sort of standard Interwar Modernism because it has these really standard traditional windows. Like with these early modernist buildings, that's something you often see where they were trying to make it modern in terms of the form, but then they weren't trying to make every detail be modern as well. Like say they like later modernists would make custom design windows, but like Adolf Loos and then this building, they're both just like kind of normal looking windows.
Yeah. And then came the 1925 International Exhibition of Modern Decorative and Industrial Arts in Paris.
Yeah. So this has a French name, but we're not going to try to pronounce it. I'm really bad with French. But it wasn't quite a World's Fair because there are actually 3 different types of World Expos or World Fairs. There are the World Expos. Those are what we traditionally think of as World Fairs. Those are the largest, and they've historically focused on industry. Now they're more about nation building. And then there are horticultural expos. And then this one was what was called a specialized expo. So it's a one-off expo that has a very specific theme. And for this one, it was the decorative arts.
Right. It was massive. There were 15,000 exhibitors from 20 different countries, over 16 million visitors within 6 months. And the point of it was to bring together all the Allied powers after World War I. So that's why, Germany was not a part of it, despite being pretty deep into the arts in this time.
Yeah. And, we mentioned earlier that Art Deco, it began as a French style. So the pavilions at this expo, say for like French retailers, French designers, like the pavilion of the Galerie Lafayette, a department store, those look really Art Deco. But then the pavilions that were for countries, like say Poland, those they did look modern, but they really weren't characteristically Art Deco.
Sure.
Because the style was originating from France at the time.
Right.
Yeah. But one of the prerequisites of this fair was that you had to work in a modern style. It wasn't, Art Deco didn't exist. That word wasn't around yet. It really was just like they were bringing together all of these people in the decorative arts whose style looked modern.
Sure. And it's interesting because it is bridging the gap between that pre-war style and what is now modern, where they still have these, every entrance of these buildings have either a relief sculpture or some sort of 2D graphic, and that style kind of turned itself into Art Deco into the future.
Yeah, I learned a term this week actually for when you have some sort of like decoration above a doorway or window, projection. Art Deco has a lot of projections.
They love projections.
Yeah. Something that's interesting is that the United States, they didn't participate in this expo. They actually were invited, but they chose not to come. But it had a big impact on American artists. Plenty of Americans attended the fair, and that's sort of what helped get the style introduced here.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like the City Beautiful movement where, it just kind of spread like wildfire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, world fairs are interesting because if you look at them in retrospect, you can see what a society's vision of the future looked like in a particular time. Like, the very first world fairs had very different visions than what was happening by 1925.
Sure.
And then the most recent World's Fair in Osaka, that one really focused on incorporating like nature into the designs.
Yeah, like mass timber structures.
Yeah, because futurism isn't a static aesthetic. It represents the values of a society in a given moment.
Right.
Yeah.
So for Art Deco versus neoclassicism versus Art Nouveau, they kind of share a lot of similar traits, but they're kind of all branching from a similar source, where neoclassicism, Art Deco initially borrowed a lot of elements from neoclassical style, but like the columns in Buffalo City Hall, which we'll talk about later. But it evolved into its own distinct movement. Other hints of neoclassical inspiration are evident in paintings or relief sculptures of characters that tell some sort of story.
Yeah. There are a lot of those in Art Deco. And I like them where, like, say, like light is personified, or like a particular place. Like the Atlas statue in front of Rockefeller Center. That's a really good example.
Right.
But Art Deco, it really moved beyond just Greco-Roman mythology. It had too big of an appetite for grandeur. And it kind of makes me think of this quote from Paris is Burning. Have you ever seen that?
No, I haven't.
It's this documentary about the drag/ballroom scene in New York City in the 70s or 80s. I forget when. But there's this quote in there where they said something like, a drag queen is a gay man who has too much fashion sense for one gender. And I feel like Art Deco, they just had too much of an appetite for, like, monoliths, that they just couldn't be satisfied with one civilization. They ended up, sampling from things like Peru or like Mayan architecture.
Right.
Like they really sampled from everything they could.
Well, they were also kind of creating their own, not really religion, but, for lack of a better term, religion, in the sense of they stopped drawing on history like neoclassical architecture, and they were kind of talking about the future and creating their own deities that were, related to the future, like industry and
progress.
Yeah, progress. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like that kind of thing. It's always fun to see like a place personified too.
Right. It also kind of brings the old architecture, ancient architecture, down to earth, in a sense of like, maybe those people didn't believe in all those gods. It was maybe just to more understand the world that they're currently living in.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting theory. I mean, I think that, like, instead of reflecting religious virtues or values with these personifications, it instead was like civic values.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Art Nouveau. So Art Nouveau, I mean, as we mentioned with the Secession style, a lot of early like examples of Art Deco, they look a little bit Art Nouveau. But it was a design style that originated in France, but it stayed a lot more European. Art Deco ended up becoming much more American. But there are very few examples of Art Nouveau here in the United States. And in Chicago, the only really good example is that France once gifted us a replica of their entrances for the Paris Metro. And that's the only like 100% Art Nouveau example I can think of in the city.
Yeah, I love pointing that metro station out whenever I'm downtown with people that aren't from here. But yeah, there's like some random, tile work or something on houses. I think there's one on Logan Boulevard that I saw. But besides that, there's nothing truly Art Nouveau here.
Yeah. And in terms of its style, it's very sinewy and natural. There's this analogy that circulates online where people will say Art Nouveau is when it looks like it's made by elves, and Art Deco is when it looks like it's made by dwarves. And that kind of makes me sad that people need this Disney adult analogy in order to understand the difference, but it does work.
Yeah, it just means that Art Nouveau is based more in nature, and Art Deco glamorizes machines and industry.
Yeah, a lot more metal.
A lot more metal.
But, in order for our audience to kind of understand Art Deco more in depth, let's actually break down the elements a little bit. So the first one, I always like to start with the color scheme.
Sure.
This one, it has a heavy reliance on gold and silver. This is partly because, after World War I, precious materials, they were not as rationed. You could work in gold or silver, and things were becoming more and more mechanized, so there was more metal being used in designed objects. But Art Deco, in general, it doesn't have that restrictive of a color palette. It has to have metallics at least a little bit, and then it's also generally paired with jewel tones.
Yeah, my favorite Art Deco buildings are definitely the ones that have a base in very natural tones with just hints of color throughout them. But yeah, the cap, I feel like, of buildings are always usually where it gets the most ornate, like way up at the top.
Yeah, it's the cornice, that Louis Sullivan popularized.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're much more like spires. I mean, they'll shoot like straight up.
Yeah, it feels like a reflection of the 20s where everyone's letting loose, everyone's partying, everyone's having fun. So why should the buildings be boring,
I mean, even to this day, Art Deco buildings are still the most colorful on most city skylines. There's never been a more colorful architectural style.
Yeah.
And then another element, geometric forms. So I'd say these are even more integral than the color palette because both in the shape, like say with setbacks, these succeeding rows of elevation, and then also in the motifs, in the patterns that adorn every single Art Deco object.
Yeah, it's not just two-dimensional too. Often the stone or the concrete that these buildings were being made out of, between windows and sticking up above the setbacks, there were geometric forms snuck in there as well. Yeah.
And in general, it ends up resulting in these Art Deco objects, buildings looking like they're aerodynamic.
Right.
When they're not designed for speed, but they still have these really aerodynamic forms.
Sure. And often on the interiors, sometimes on the exteriors, but there's also often mosaic tiles made out of terracotta. It's, they're very ornate. They're usually in arch form with concrete kind of separating them from their surroundings.
They're really beautiful.
It's some of the
best tile work.
Yeah, some of the best tile work in modern day.
Yeah.
And on the 2D front, there are fonts that maybe you could look at a font and you could think like that reminds me of Art Deco, but they're often characterized as being pretty narrow, pretty tall letters, and the waistline of the letters, think like the bridge between the H or where the leg of the R meets the vertical line, those being pretty separate from the midline of the letter itself. So maybe you bring that leg of the R like almost to the top of the R, and you have these like really tall, really elongated forms of all the letters, and that's an Art Deco font.
Yeah, I mean, it looks really vertical in the end.
Right.
There's a synergy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Often Art Deco is also trying to tell some sort of story throughout its design, usually with themes, like we said, celebrating industry, modernity, craftsmanship, and unity.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like industry and modernity, they went hand in hand during this time. But yeah, it's a celebration. It's very utopian. Like there's a futurism. That's another element to it. So to us now, Art Deco looks old-timey to people living in the 21st century. But at the time, it looked incredibly futuristic. They thought that this is what, the future was going to look like.
Yeah, it sometimes can creep into streamlined modern, but, there's often air travel and wings incorporated into a lot of the designs.
Yeah. Like the Chrysler Building, they actually have a mural in the lobby. It's called the Transport and Human Endeavor mural. And that one has these really beautiful paintings of airplanes. But another area that shows that this was the aesthetic of the future was that not only did Art Deco arise out of a specialized expo, but it continued to be an aesthetic for World's Fairs for a period of time. Like here in Chicago, we have had 2 World's Fairs. The second one was the Century of Progress Exposition in 1933. That happened 100 years after Chicago was founded, and it happened in the middle of the Great Depression. It was a really bleak time. It was one of the only, the jobs at the fair were some of the only jobs that were available to a lot of unemployed people here. And Art Deco was chosen as the aesthetic for the fair because it still presented a vision of the future that was optimistic and utopian.
Right. Yeah, you brought up that that Art Deco building, the travel and transportation building, and it looked sort of, what is the word for that aesthetic of, it's like the 1980s bachelor pad, like it's like everything's piano black and chrome. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Can you picture what I'm trying to say with that? It is like tile work, or
Well, you're just talking about that sounds like something from a James Bond movie. Is that?
I guess a little bit like
a
certain era of James Bond movies, but
yeah,
I don't know. When I saw that building, I was like, wow, this is like so far into the future of what I'm imagining.
Yeah,
glass block. And
yeah,
stuff.
That's on our Pinterest board. So that particular building, the Travel and Transport Building, it had what was the first suspended dome. Yeah. So it has these structures above it that would be used to raise and lower the dome of the building depending on the temperature. I guess if it was in the summer, they'd raise it all the way up, and then if it was winter, they'd raise it down. But yeah, it just looks super industrial because of that. And the poster for the fair, the Century of Progress poster, that's one of the best examples of this in print.
Yeah, it's bright, it's colorful, it's symmetrical, it plays with scale. and it's very vertical. The structure in the center is reaching up into the sky.
Yeah.
You have the expo beneath it.
Yeah. No, I don't know what structure is depicted on the poster, but that
Me
one's
neither.
also really beautiful.
Yeah.
And then the other element that comes through with this style, so archaeology. This is something I learned from a podcast episode I listened to in Art Deco. You know what's interesting is so often when I'm doing a topic, I'll search and see if, anyone's done a podcast episode and what we're about to talk about. And often there's not for these obscure aesthetics and things like that. But we're like the second podcast to ever do an Art Deco episode.
That's
weird, right?
That's fascinating. We should do an episode on why no one's ever done an Art Deco episode.
I don't know. Maybe, design, aesthetics, people oftentimes want to look at them instead of hear about them.
That's true.
But there's a niche. We found it for people who do. But yeah, that podcast episode, I learned from this historian that was being interviewed that around the 20s and 30s, there were a lot of archaeological discoveries that were happening. And there were like improvements in communications to the degree that, if you discovered an ancient tomb on one other side of the world, you could read about it in Great Britain or like the United States within a week. And so you could hear about all of these archaeological discoveries as they were happening and be really inspired by them because you were like the first person seeing these things in hundreds or thousands of years.
Yeah. And, the limestone and sandstone and concrete used in these buildings really just kind of add to the ancient vibe of what's going on. They're using motifs from that time. They're using materials from the time. They're creating highly detailed monuments in a way.
Yeah. And sometimes they're just like so literal. Especially when you see like Mayan revival Art Deco, you're like, okay, this is like one for one.
Right. I love that when Americans do a revival style of an architecture and it just takes the detailing of some past time and they just form it onto an American skeleton of a building. I find it very funny. Like you'll see like houses that look like castles or something, but they're just like a row house.
Every city's Chinatown in the United States isn't very authentic.
That's a great example. Yeah, they're just regular row buildings
with pagodas.
With pagodas
for no reason.
I love it.
Yeah. So now we can talk about Art Deco skyscrapers. We're going to talk about two in depth, but first I want to give a shout out to this one really obscure building that we're going to sample a statue from it for the episode artwork. It's the Niagara Mohawk building in Syracuse, New York.
Right.
Have you been to Syracuse?
I've spent a little bit of time in Syracuse. It's about halfway between Buffalo and New York. So I don't know. I think I visited a friend there once, but it wasn't, too long.
Yeah. So this building, not a skyscraper, so I'm not going to discuss it in depth, but it's really richly ornamented. I think because it's so short, they could just spend more of the budget on just making it look cool. And they have this sculpture called the Spirit of Light, and that is the Platonic ideal of Art Deco for me.
Right. Yeah. I'll also shout out two buildings. One of them is maybe a skyscraper. It's 408 feet tall. It's the Rand building in Buffalo. It's in Lafayette Square. Urban legend says that it inspired the Empire State Building. It was, completed a couple years before that one started being built. So I think the architects visited Buffalo like right before construction started, right before they submitted the design. So I think Buffalonians in the late 1920s were like, we created that building. And then there's also one that I used to live around the corner from. It's not a skyscraper by any means. It's like 2 stories, 3 stories tall. It's an old telephone building, but the window divisions were these like large, maybe copper. I think they're like just super oxidized copper reliefs of like these 2D figures holding lightning bolts. And I would just always make sure I could walk by it whenever I was going on a walk somewhere because it was just so fun. It just like, it took up the whole width of the block.
It was edifying.
It was great. It's just such a great, and it's like Verizon now because it's a telephone building. So there's no street activity in front of it. It's great.
We have one that's a little bit like that here where it's a power station where you kind of can't tell what it is from the outside, but on the relief or the facade of the building, there's a relief of Zeus or like someone holding lightning bolts. And so it implies, what's inside, which is it's like something to do with our electrical infrastructure.
That's so fun. We should bring that back. No one does that anymore.
Yeah. So the first of the two skyscrapers we'll talk about is the Carbide and Carbon Building here in Chicago.
Yeah, the Carbide and Carbon Building was developed. The Carbide and Carbon Company developed the first dry cell battery, and they commissioned Burnham and Brothers, who were the sons of Daniel Burnham, to build their regional headquarters. It was completed in 1929. I think it's kind of poetic in a way that Daniel Burnham was so pivotal to early skyscrapers and how they were constructed. And his sons carried on his legacy by kind of rounding out those, 5 decades of early skyscrapers by building this Art Deco masterpiece.
Yeah. He didn't have fail sons.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Because the Carbide and Carbon Building, it's really beautiful. I mean, the look of it, it's sort of this like black, what's the material again?
It's black granite.
Yeah. And it has these really beautiful gold accents near the top.
Yeah.
It's this very thin gold leaf. And if you ever take a river tour, that's how most people learn about this building, because it's not particularly tall. So when you see it for the first time, it's often on a river tour. And the tour guide will tell the story about like how there's this local legend that it was designed based off of a champagne bottle, because, I mean, there's association between the Roaring Twenties and champagne because of champagne towers and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's also all green terracotta. Like after the first 2 stories, it's this dark, rich green terracotta. And it really stands out at the bottom of Magnificent Mile, where you have all these white terracotta structures that are all of different styles, Roman Revival or whatever. And but then you have this dark green, just gorgeous piece of architecture with a gold cap. It just stands out completely.
And I mean, in terms of Art Deco skyscrapers, it's not even that flashy, because I mean the color palette is pretty muted, but it's still more than average.
Right. I think it stands out because everything else around it is very tonally gray.
Yeah.
The lobby is preserved with more gold colored detailing and a brighter granite. And it's now home to a very expensive cafe. Have you ever been to that cafe?
Well, no, I've never been to the cafe, but I had a friend who stayed in that hotel.
Yeah.
So I have been, I've been in the lobby, I've taken the elevator up, and those elevators are super nice. I mean, that's something you see with Art Deco buildings, is the elevators are incorporated as part of the design, where oftentimes the tile work or the patterns will point towards them, and then they'll have projections over the elevators that are really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there was a quote from a 1930s brochure for the building that was, "The effect of such beauty in a building upon the morale of the people employed in it is unquestionably beneficial and inspiring, and to the clients, business associates, and visitors, it is constant assurance that the organizations they are dealing with are of the highest caliber." So, I mean, at least it's not this boutique hotel in like just a boring old building. It's carrying on the legacy of what it was built for.
Yeah. I mean, as a librarian, I've worked in many different library branches, and there's a big difference between working for a branch that was built in the 60s and looks ugly.
Yeah.
And then one that's a bit older or more recent that looks new. Yeah, I mean, it makes a big difference if you work in a place that you think is beautiful. Like, you do feel happy going to work.
Do you feel like the library you work in right now meets those standards?
Yeah, I'd say the one that I do at the moment does. But I mean, as a CPL librarian, we move around a lot as part of our career every time we're promoted. So I won't be there forever.
That's fair. Yeah, many of Chicago's Art Deco buildings are these like large, imposing structures like the Board of Trade or Merchandise Mart, and they're more conveying power and strength. But the Carbide and Carbon Building is like the pinnacle of elegance and glam for the Art Deco movement. The interior is Noir Belge. I don't know. I'm not very good.
Is that the name of an architect?
Sorry?
Is that the name of an architect?
No, it's the type of marble that they use for the interior. It's one of the most expensive marbles in the world.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's something about, Art Deco is like they didn't have to cut corners with materials. There weren't wartime rations.
Right.
Yeah.
They were celebrating those materials. And the people working with them were creating pieces of art as well.
Any other thoughts on this one before we move on?
I guess the one thing is just I love, if you really look at a detail, it's hard to see from, the street. But if you see a detailed photograph of the top of it, the gold kind of trickles down the edges as if it was like liquid.
Yeah.
And the way it contrasts with the terracotta is just really satisfying for me.
No, I mean, that adds to this sort of like champagne bottle myth.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you're ripping the foil off the top of the champagne bottle, and there's like some remnants of it or something.
Oh, yeah. I can see that. So the next building I want to talk about, it's the Guardian Building in Detroit, Michigan. I don't know how common or popular this is. Like, I don't know if the average listener will know about this, but it's not only one of the best Art Deco skyscrapers, I think it's the best skyscraper in Detroit.
Absolutely. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
It was built in 1929, and it was built by a company called the Union Trust Company. They sold trusts, and very shortly after this building was built, they went out of business. They think they were only tenants there for like 2 years or something.
Did something happen or?
They caused like a whole like banking crisis. Yeah, they had to. Anyway, I don't want to get too mired in the details, but they had to declare like a bank holiday in Michigan, and then over 30 states had to like also enact bank holidays because they caused a bank run. Right. It was this whole thing. But yeah, the way they became insolvent and bankrupt was actually interesting.
Yeah.
But the Guardian Building itself, it's a real gem because it's incredibly colorful.
Yeah.
There's not really a good explanation as to why. Like the owners before this building opened, they were just like, yeah, it's colorful, and we just wanted it to be.
It kind of feels like the Carbide and Carbon Building, where they were just making batteries, but they have this like incredibly ornate building, you know, in front of them.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about bankers today and their aesthetic taste, they would never want something like this.
Yeah, maybe just a giant Patagonia vest or something.
Yeah. And, you know, this building, it was very extravagant. I couldn't really find anything that concretely said the company went out of business because they spent too much on it, but I'm sure it didn't help because they spent money on things like, for example, there's this dividing wall between like two parts of the lobby. It's made out of mono metal, and it has 2 Tiffany clocks. And I never heard of mono metal before this week.
Yeah,
Had you?
Me neither. Yeah.
So it's apparently a nickel copper alloy, and it's used in place of brass and copper, like just because it's incredibly durable. But like this is the interior of a bank.
Right.
And they used Monel not only for this gate, but literally all exposed metal for the building.
Yeah.
Incredibly expensive. Like the use case for it is basically like if you need to withstand salt water. Like Monel is used for oil rigs in the present day. That's like the only use case. They're just like using it for this bank because they're like, why not?
Yeah, it feels like something that would be in a department store or something, not a bank.
Well, it's not exposed to the elements, so like why?
Right.
But I don't know. It's cool that they used it, but
oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know. This detail was really interesting to me. Those doors had never really stood out to me, like in just, you know, looking at pictures of this building. And, you know, because maybe I didn't know that they were made out of mono metal. And it is such a key Art Deco detail of this building because it bridges that gap between old and new, where, you know, it has like spikes on it and it almost feels like a medieval gate in some weird way. But the geometric detailing on it and the shaping of it all, and like it's almost like a rectangle clock. That's, you know, modern. So I don't know, it just has this like this weird in between.
Yeah, the in between is important. We'll circle back to that at the end.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing this building has that I haven't really talked about yet is they're really prominent Native American motifs. So that was one of the many cultures that Art Deco sampled from. And, you know, you can see it on friezes on the building's facade. You can see it on the tile patterns that surround the elevators. The color scheme, it's meant to be, you know, elicit ideas of Native American culture. I tried to find information on how accurate their references or cultural appropriation is. I didn't find anything that really convinced me, just that the building is quote unquote Navajo inspired.
Sure.
But I really doubt these architects from the 20s were like looking at like legit sources to find out what real Native American patterns looked like. But it's kind of a hot take for me, but I actually really appreciate the Art Deco buildings that incorporate Native American designs, like the Guardian Building, which we're talking about now, Buffalo City Hall, which we'll talk about later, then also this other one, the Hall of Waters, and there are others. But I mean, if not for this brief period in the 20s to 30s when there were these American Art Deco architects sampling Native American culture, there would be no real presence of Native American culture in the built environment, even if it's not authentic. Because I just think there's this real absence of American culture here in the United States. I don't think this is true for Canada. Like, I know that there's this big development that's getting planned for Vancouver. I don't exactly know how to say it the right way, but it's spelled like SENAKW. It's this big like housing development planned for Native Americans to live in that has Native American inspired motifs on the buildings. But like, yeah, I'd rather we have this than nothing. Like,
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
I agree. There's a casino in Niagara Falls, New York, which is like the tallest building in Niagara Falls, New York by a lot. And it's a Seneca casino, and it kind of reminds me of that housing development that you brought up, but in a 2000s kind of way. Like it's all lit up and
the patterns or the sort of
right.
like Native American inspired patterns, they're just like implemented with that casino through glasswork.
For sure.
Yeah.
The thing about, the Native American inspiration also that, I thought of was that westward expansion had largely been completed in the decades leading up to World War I.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense in my mind if you were to kind of maybe think of World War I, I could imagine it being somewhat like COVID, where everything was put on pause. It's total war. All the resources are going to this war. Everyone's lives are stopped. And when these white architects started building these buildings again, it makes sense to me, whether it's right or wrong, that they were looking at this nostalgic past. And, you're looking at Navajo structures, those are hundreds and hundreds of miles away from Detroit. They're not, but the idea of this westward expansion, they were probably just feeling very nostalgic at the time. So I don't know if it was about accuracy, but more just
no, for sure not accuracy. It just
nostalgia.
Looked cool.
Yeah, it just looked cool.
That's
and it was
why
nostalgic. I like it too.
Yeah. But related to that, now I think we can discuss sort of Art Deco and American identity, because it's perceived as being this incredibly American style. As we've talked about, it has its origins in Europe and France, also in Austria with the Vienna Secession. But what about it is like so American?
Right.
I mean, I think that Art Deco, even though it didn't originate here, it took root here and grew as much as it did, because there's a really tight commensal relationship between Art Deco and industry. We were the industrial power, I think starting around this time. I mean, really after World War II, but we were growing exponentially. I mean, we had all of these cities that were building, and there were room for all these new skyscrapers, and Art Deco is also really spreading, I think, because there is, again, that like consumer angle to it, where it was kind of the first consumer aesthetic, and our markets were, selling products more and more using Art Deco designs. And that's why it proliferated as much as it did.
Yeah, we had the fastest growing cities in the world. We were producing the most that we had ever had. And it's just the most American thing. Like, it's just like the Industrial Revolution. It started in Britain, and we took it even further. And then Art Deco started in France, and we also took it even further.
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned last week on our early skyscrapers episode that by 1930, New York City had the 10 tallest buildings in the world. The majority of those were Art Deco skyscrapers.
Yeah.
I mean, top of the pack, Empire State Building, Chrysler Building.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it was really just because we grew.
Right. And, the themes of capitalism that are, strewn throughout all of Art Deco, it's not just in the architecture. There's paintings in Washington, D.C., they're going to be in the Pinterest board. But these are paintings of workers in a factory. And they're just very colorful and, interesting and geometric. But that is such an innate part of this design. And there's something to be said about this time in America where there's a great divide in class. There's an economy crash coming, at the end of the decade that, you probably could never guess that was going to happen. And, we're right at the end of this war. But labor was so crucial to this glamorous aesthetic. That was really what was being celebrated throughout this whole aesthetic. And it just feels, I just have this question. The whole time I was researching this, like I was battling this in my mind, because I do love Art Deco, but I'm like, is it appropriation or is it true appreciation? And I think it depends on the building or whatever that piece of artwork is. But it really is interesting to me that, whether it's a painting or a building, that there is always, I feel like, something that has to do with labor.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you look at those murals that you put on the Pinterest board, they look kind of like Soviet realism.
Right.
Like these Soviet paintings and sculptures that celebrated everyday people and workers.
Yeah.
But I mean, our system of finance and government was completely different than theirs at the time.
Yeah. I think probably an interwar time of America was as close as we ever got, like leading into FDR. But
Oh, you're right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
yeah,
Wait,
I mean,
when did FDR take office?
1933.
Wow, you know that off the top of your head?
Yeah, I love
Impressive.
FDR.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, that makes sense then. I mean, Art Deco, it went into the 30s.
Yeah.
So.
And it's not like FDR just came out of nowhere. The 20s were leading towards that. And I think that's, I guess, why I was battling this in my mind, because it's, again, he didn't come out of nowhere. Like there was a time leading into that where I think that labor was really celebrated in America. And we just got over all these rail strikes pre-war. And I think that the war brought everyone together. You know, maybe war is terrible, but in a way, it brought everyone together, especially those total wars. And at the end of it, you know, we were ready to care about labor in a way that was different than the late 20th century, late 19th century.
Yeah. No, this is an interesting angle to take the conversation in, because when I suggested talking about Art Deco in relation to American identity and capitalism, I expected us to critique it.
Right.
But actually, Art Deco, I mean, even though it was this aesthetic of opulence, and I mean, it was really rich patrons usually commissioning it, yeah, it did celebrate labor.
Yeah. I mean, the laborers are the ones that were sculpting the mural, sculpting the reliefs and creating, you know, cutting the terracotta and painting the murals, whether they actually cared about the workers or not, you know. And we'll talk about the Gilded Age later. And, you know, in contrast to modern day, I think that we're very far from that, though. And that is kind of what removes us from the, you know, the real Gilded Age and the post-Gilded Age.
Yeah. And then I wanted to just talk about Art Deco and British identity a little bit, because I learned about that Art Deco, it really wasn't implemented in Britain too much in terms of architecture. It was actually pretty rarely used. The only exception is really with movie theaters, where there are some really famous examples. I mean, the ABC Cinema in Brighton, the Royal Cinema set in Coldfield. And what's interesting is that the sort of association between movie theaters and Art Deco in Britain, it kind of spread internationally. It gave rise to this consumer aesthetic called Decoplex. Had you ever heard of it before this week?
I don't know if I had ever heard that term.
But you know what it is.
Yeah, but I know what it is.
It's really easily recognizable.
Yeah.
So it's one of the Kari stamped consumer aesthetics. It's on their page. But I mean, growing up, I went to movie theaters that were emblematic of this. It's just the movie theater style that's really bright and garish that children like.
It's every Regal theater.
Yeah, it's every Regal theater. I mean, there's one in Chicago, Regal City North. That one is like really emblematic. Mm-hmm. There's also one in Evanston called AMC Evanston 12. That really fits into this. But yeah, it's more maximal than what you'd see with the British Art Deco movie theaters. Those were actually kind of austere looking. Mm-hmm. I mean, they had the streamlines. They looked a little bit more like streamline modern. They were still Art Deco, but yeah, they weren't as like colorful as what Decoplex was.
I passed the Regal City North theater in like a Uber the other day, and I had passed it before researching this episode, but you know, just like 3 days ago I passed it and I was like, wait, that's the one. It's so funny. It doesn't look the same as it did before though, right?
No, I'm sure they've remodeled it a little bit. Okay. But it was a holdout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty fun. King Kong 2005 comes to mind in this weird way, because it, you know, the old movie is around that time, and then I think that there was that 90s nostalgia for
old Hollywood.
Yeah, old Hollywood. And, you know, there's the whole New York scene, and they're in the theater. And I don't know, it came out at the right time for that, and it is nostalgic for the time. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that King Kong movie. But the Kari description, they actually offer an explanation that goes a bit deeper, where it's not only Art Deco being associated with movie theaters, but Hollywood itself. Like they say the 1930s to 40s golden age of Hollywood, that's really why Decoplex, you know, became this nostalgic aesthetic that emerged, because like movie theaters, I mean, particularly in the 20s and 30s, they were a place for escapism.
Yeah.
And people had just gotten out of World War I, and they would go to these theaters to see movies that lifted their spirits. And so having this utopian style on the outside and the inside with the actual films, it was all, meant to make people feel better.
Yeah. Do you think the revival of that architectural style is kind of, related to our new age, escapism with like using vinyl records or CDs or iPods and stuff like that? Do you think that that's because these types of theaters did come back in the 90s, in the 2000s? Like, do you think that that is related?
Well, I mean, actually, the British Art Deco theaters would have been more so single screen theaters. This was before the rise of the multiplex.
Yeah.
And Decoplex, the name plex, it refers to multiplexes. So, it's not really like the revival of dead, like quote unquote dead technologies, which sounds crazy to say about a theater because it's so big.
Yeah.
But it's not literally like, it was a modern twist,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But now, as for Art Deco and media, is that
sure?
Do you have any more?
Yeah. So I want to start out by talking about Bioshock. It's a video game. Have you ever played it?
I had like an uncle and older cousins that really liked playing it, so I guess I didn't pick up on the themes of the story, but the aesthetic I definitely was drawn to.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't allowed to play video games growing up as a kid, except I could have a handheld and I played Pokemon. But I did go to a friend's house in middle school where they were playing Bioshock, and I was immediately intrigued.
Yeah.
Because they started playing it from the beginning, and there's this really iconic intro where you're the main character, you're dropped off at this pier, and you go into a lighthouse, and then you descend down.
Yes.
And then there's this really like amazing Art Deco sculpture, and then you just suddenly see this underwater city.
Wow.
So let me explain what Bioshock is a little better. So the video game franchise, it debuted in 2007. 4 games came out under the title. The first 3, they're set in Rapture. Rapture is this underwater city where basically it was created in order for like rich people to escape the everyday world and go to a place where their talents are like accurately rewarded or whatever. So it's this laissez-faire, it's a very capitalist place. And because it's like, a free-for-all, there start to be these companies that like sell experimental drugs to the residents, and it's not good for them. So it becomes dystopian and Rapture collapses. And me being like a middle schooler, I didn't realize that actually like it was being critical of capitalism.
Yeah.
Because I learned that the game, it was also inspired by Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. Do you know that book?
Yeah, I know of Ayn Rand and all the things that they've written, but
yeah, she's this really quack philosopher who's super right-wing. I mean, her philosophy, objectivism, it's basically just libertarianism. It's hyper-individualistic.
Right.
And she wrote Atlas Shrugged, and I actually read that book as like a tween.
Oh, yeah?
I was like, I like Bioshock. I should read this.
For fun? Like, because of Bioshock.
Yeah,
That's
it's
so
like
funny.
a 700-page book.
Oh my god.
And I think I got to page 400 or 500. But in the book, there's what's called Galt's Gulch. And it's basically like what Rapture was, where it's this like remote location for the rich people to escape to because they're not being like fairly or accurately rewarded by society.
Yeah.
And in the book, it's utopian. Like, of course,
Right.
Galt's Gulch, it ends up not collapsing, but yeah, Rapture does, because it's
Right.
really a criticism of it. But I don't really think that the association in Bioshock between Art Deco and capitalism or laissez-faire capitalism is really super warranted. I mean, after, learning about its like celebration of labor and things like
Sure.
that.
I mean, it is definitely a time that it makes sense. Like, it makes sense that if Rapture were to exist, it would be Art Deco. And it would be built for those types of people. And their struggle to be seen for having skills, it makes sense. Like, it wouldn't happen at any other time except for Art Deco.
Yeah. I mean, if you were to theoretically get away with building an underwater city with
Right.
no laws, yeah, sure, I guess the 20s makes sense. And then next, I want to talk about Nightmare Alley. It's a movie from 2021. Have you seen it?
I have like avoided it for some reason. I really like Guillermo del Toro. I think that he makes very interesting movies, and he's kind of like he's a love him or you hate him type of person. Like, I think anytime one of his movies comes out, they're pretty polarizing. But he did the Shape of Water. I really like The Shape of Water.
Yeah. That one won an Academy Award, which felt warranted.
Yeah.
But this one, Nightmare Alley, it was nominated and didn't win, but it shouldn't have even been nominated.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think the cinematography is nice. The movie's very beautiful, but the acting and plot are a little bit whack. It's like this one person who starts working at a circus, and then he becomes this prolific psychic, but he's a quack. The movie does not present his psychic abilities as being authentic or genuine.
Right.
But the movie, I want to talk about it because it's set partially in Buffalo, New York. So the main character, whose name is Stanton Carlyle, he moves to Buffalo, New York after he becomes more successful as a psychic. And then Buffalo debuts in this film in this scene where he's like giving this reading to a large group of really wealthy Buffalo elites.
Yeah.
And I mean, it keeps going from there. I don't want to spoil it past that, but there's a character whose office is in Buffalo City Hall. And I want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Before we get too much into the building, it was definitely a moment for Buffalonians when they were filming this, because they filmed it in Buffalo and in Southern Ontario and Toronto and stuff.
Yeah.
And I just remember like memes in the local community going around of, you have Bradley Cooper in town, and how often is Bradley Cooper filming a movie in Buffalo? It was a moment. Maybe that's why I got like Nightmare Alley fatigue from everyone.
All the memes.
Yeah.
It was an interesting choice for Del Toro, though, because, I mean, he said he wanted to film it there because he wanted to find a city that was really interesting to visit for an audience that was not a city they were overly familiar with.
Yeah.
And I mean, for me watching it, I don't know why I watched the movie. I don't really watch that many, but it seemed visually appealing. And then once it got to the Buffalo parts, I was like kind of stunned.
Yeah.
Because I was like, where is this? This looks so cool.
Yeah. I think a lot of the shots are like superimposed together. Were there any shots inside of Central Terminal, or am I thinking of a different movie?
I don't think so.
No, just City Hall.
No, just City Hall.
Yeah. I remember going downtown and seeing old cars around Niagara Square, which is right in front of City Hall. And that was really fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, the building is really spectacular. Do you want to talk about Buffalo City Hall now?
Yeah, we can get into it.
So Buffalo City Hall is an Art Deco municipal building from 1931. It has Native American motifs, but it's less ornamented than the Guardian building per se, or for example.
Yeah, and this City Hall, it doesn't fit into the interstitial period I mentioned on last week's episode, where the tallest buildings in a lot of American cities were city halls. It's huge though, but it was never quite the biggest.
Yeah, it was the second behind the Rand building.
Yeah,
for a long time. It actually might be the next one below the Rand building that I mentioned earlier.
I mean, it's huge because it's not only like tall. I mean, it's 32 stories, but it's also just like really thick. It has a bit of a merchandise mart feel to it.
Yeah, it totally does. And there's a public square, which has like always kind of been like the center of Buffalo. Mm-hmm. All the major avenues like run right into the center point, and City Hall is in that center point. So it's really viewed as the true civic center of the whole city.
Yeah.
And to lay the groundwork, architectural historian John H. Conlin, in his book Buffalo City Hall, an American-esque masterpiece, says, John J. Wade's powerful 1929 design for City Hall is among the best realizations of Art Deco style, free of classism. Why do you think it's void of classism?
Well, I don't know if I fully agree, just because, I mean, the murals inside of it, they have these sort of personification, deification of different values. We'll talk about the murals a little bit more in depth soon, but, they have like the city of Buffalo personified, construction, education, protection, charity, all of these civic values personified. And that to me just feels extremely Greco-Roman because, I mean, think about the muses and how each of the muses personified a different form of art. It's the same sort of logic.
Yeah. The whole building kind of feels like on the opposite end of the glam spectrum of Carbide and Carbon. It's mostly made up of like beige, almost pink sandstone. I'm not sure exactly where the sandstone is. There's a lot of local sandstone in Buffalo, but it's not, I don't think it's one of those. One of the big ones. Kind of looks like Mayan ruins in a way. And its details mostly through shaping until you get up to the top, where there are these colorful 3D chevrons and a band of Native American motifs. There's an observation deck that you can stand up there, and the details become even bigger. And on top of that is this glass and metal, like dark blue cap.
Yeah. You know what's my favorite part of the building, though? It's actually, I believe, where the aldermen of the city pass laws. Because you have aldermen there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or not really aldermen. They're common council, but they don't have as much power as aldermen.
Oh, I thought, well, there are 50, right? There's some sort of thing we share in common. I think you have like 50 city councilors as well.
There's common council districts, but it's nothing like
But
like there's no yes,
wherever
no.
it is, they pass laws. There's
Yeah.
this really beautiful stained glass ceiling above it.
Yeah.
That's my favorite part of the building.
That's like, I think where all like court cases go on. Not like true court cases, but all hearings. Like that's where the mayor will like go and be like proposing something. Yeah, proposing something to all of the common council and they vote on it and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's the prettiest part of the building.
Yeah. One time I was in there and I was like going to change my residence or something like that. And it was on the same floor as there. And the security guard was like, you have to be quiet because there's a hearing going on or something. He's like, but do you want to see the inside? And he like, while something was going on, he let me stand there in the doorway. It was so cool.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it was really beautiful.
Yeah.
But I grew up around this building my whole life. Like, I've seen it a billion times, it feels like. And it's similar to Niagara Falls in a way where I kind of just stopped thinking about it. But, researching this episode again, I fell in love with this building. Like it's always been special to me, but it really, having to break down the details of it, made it so much more special.
I mean, I think lifelong residents of cities, they'll reach a point or several points in their life where they're able to look at things with fresh eyes.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it just happens sort of accidentally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I had this, I grew up with public transit my whole life. I didn't think it was special. And then for some reason in my like mid-20s, I became obsessed with the city's L system.
Yeah, same. Yeah, that was me with buses. One day I was like, I love the bus.
Yeah.
But for the murals inside, this kind of connects to the artwork portion. It, at least to me, shows that there's a consensus at the time that none of this would be possible without the labor and the working man.
Yeah. And they're murals on the Pinterest board. So
yes,
you can look at them there. There's also going to be a link in the show notes to a link where it's like basically explaining what each of the murals are, their names, and some of the meaning.
Right. The lobby right when you walk in is incredibly captivating. Above you, there's like this terracotta mosaic tile, very similar to the Guardian building. It's in an arch form, and there's concrete reliefs on either side. Mm-hmm. And on either end of the lobby are these massive murals. And above the main entrance, which is the east end, is frontiers unfettered by any frowning fortress. And this is, do you want me to read this from?
Yeah, it's from that site. I think it will give people an idea of what it looks like. So
yeah, I tried to write it, smaller.
Redacted, yeah,
but it was a perfect amount of conciseness.
Yeah.
From Buffalo Architecture and History, it's a blog. The mural illustrates the significance of Buffalo's location at the border of Canada. The Angel of Peace holds a warrior under each arm while they are clutching their respective flags. At the left is the United States, represented by consumer goods and machinery. At the right is Canada, with a fisherman and a voyager with a canoe. Behind Peace is Niagara Falls, connecting both countries. On the Canadian side is the Peace Bridge, and on the American, Buffalo City Hall.
Yeah. It's actually so Lindy for there to be a mural about peace like this. Like, I went to Siena, which is this really old Renaissance city in Italy, and they have murals in what used to be their city hall. And one of them, it's of Siena under good governance. I believe that's the actual name of the mural. But in it, there's this representation of peace where she's asleep, and she's sleeping with her head on a pillow, which underneath the pillow, there's a pile of arrows, and she's always ready for war. And for Buffalo, for its city hall to have a mural about war and peace, like it's a city state, that feels so ancient.
I mean, Buffalo was burned down in the War of 1812 when it was just a small village by the British.
Oh, it was.
So I think it's like kind of ingrained into the nature of the city there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it makes sense for Buffalo to maybe see itself as one day being in between a war between Canada and the US, but to me it seems really random.
Yeah, it is pretty random. There was like one cannon on Main Street. Like it was like this small little town that got burned down. And the building faces the water too. Like when you're on the observation deck, Canada's right there. So I don't know, it feels right. You can see the Peace Bridge, which is the downtown link.
It is kind of cool when places view themselves as being like an arbiter between things. Like, for example, in St. Louis, their old Union Station, they have this mural that's of St. Louis, and on the right and left sides are New York City and San Francisco because they're the gateway to the West. Yeah. And so, that kind of feels similar too. Yeah.
I think like just the proximity of like where Buffalo was, like on the Great Lakes, I think it was the second largest train junction, maybe not train junction, second most important rail hub outside of Chicago, because because Canada is literally 2 miles away, or if you threw a football, it's less. But there's a international rail bridge there, and trucks come over the Peace Bridge every day.
Yeah.
But in the back of the lobby on the west end is talents diversified, find vent in myriad forms. And again, from Buffalo Architecture and History, quote, seated in the center is a heroic female figure of Buffalo, haloed in a sunburst. She is holding forth festoons of golden fruit. A Native American offers her a bundle of cattails. The mural represents industries of Buffalo at which her citizens work: grain storage, agriculture, water, commerce, steelmaking, construction, and transportation are all represented.
Yeah, they're really beautiful. I mean, in the images, like, it looks super classical. And in this one, the representation of Buffalo, like, it kind of almost looks like she's a Gorgon.
Yeah.
She has this weird halo that looks really Greek.
Yeah, it is very Greek. I think that those murals are what, a long time ago made me bridge the connection of neoclassical and Art Deco. And that's why I was so excited to write about that in this episode. Because that's always kind of just been in the forefront of my mind when I think of Art Deco, because of those murals and the friezes on the outside of the building.
Yeah.
And, mirroring those murals on the inside, the front and rear entrances sport these colossal friezes done by Albert T. Stewart. And he's done stuff in New York as well. And they're hung above these sandstone columns, and they're depicting Buffalo as the connector of worlds and industry. And the main entrance shows like regular people of the city: electricians, chemists, steelworkers, architects. And the west side, the back on Elmwood, portrays the creation of Buffalo chronologically. And it's just these 5 images that are dated with a year of all significant events.
Yeah, they're all really beautiful.
Yeah.
And the next, would you like to talk about Metropolis?
Yeah. Metropolis is a film from 1927, a couple years after the Expo in Paris. And it's by German-Austrian filmmaker Fritz Lang. Have you ever seen this movie?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
And I remembered it being extremely long.
It is extremely
long. In
long.
actuality, it's only 2 hours. So actually, I could have watched it for this week. But
it was originally 210 minutes, though. Did you watch the almost 210?
No, I did not.
Because
or maybe I did.
When that was a very common criticism. A big part of this movie is that the length has always been a criticism of it. And it was originally 210 minutes long. And after critiques came out, it was reduced by a few dozen minutes. And then after the Nazis, after the Nazis censored the movie even further, it was reduced down to 95 minutes. So over half of the movie was completely lost for generations. And only in 2008 did a reel show up, an original reel show up in Argentina. And people have been spending the last couple of decades kind of reconstructing this movie. So if you watch one that's over 2 hours long, every once in a while it'll become like really bad quality, and it's because they're sticking in the old reels into it.
I think I have seen one of the longer ones then, because I do remember that when I watched it, it would suddenly be, grainy, or there'd be certain sections where they'd explain a certain plot point that had been cut.
Yeah, there was a major plot point of one of the big characters that was completely removed by the Nazis. So I guess we can't really get too much into plot, because one, it was lost for generations. Like most of this movie's life, the plot has not existed. And two, it's kind of hard to follow, but it has plenty of themes that are art. Besides just the design, it's plenty of themes that are Art Deco.
I mean, the
inspired.
name Metropolis, it's called that because it features a really large metropolis that's bigger than any city on Earth. I mean, there are airplanes flying around the city, and there are literally skyscrapers stacked on top of each other.
Right. I think someone said that Fritz Lang was inspired by seeing New York City's skyline for the first time. Mm-hmm. But that was in the 1920s, so I can't even imagine. It's probably much more like Metropolis now.
Yeah.
And, production designers Eric Kettlehut and Otto Hunt created these sets and matte paintings depicting, again, this massive, sprawling metropolis that is Art Deco inspired. And even if you haven't seen the movie, you've probably seen stills from it with, the Tower of Babel and, the trains connecting buildings and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, what I often see referenced the most is the scene where there's the robot who's like dancing really hypnotically. That's my favorite part.
The robot is bizarre because it's probably the most iconic part of the movie, but it doesn't. You could remove the robot and the movie doesn't really change very much.
Yeah.
And within this Art Deco world, the plot is based on juxtaposition. You have this Tower of Babel, it's reaching out into the sky, and that is in contrast to this dark underbelly of the city where no light reaches. You have these highways and airplanes and trains traversing endlessly, versus like the robotic, almost comical nature of the workers in the city. They move very funny. But that's, I think it's just because it's the 20s. And, these workers are seen as expendable. And then you have the son of this wealthy man, and he's in love with this female revolutionary. And he, in consequence, starts a new revolution himself.
Yeah, I remember the plot vaguely. I just remember it being largely about a labor struggle.
Yeah, there's a revolution and it gets stopped, and then the robot kind of gets them to revolt again.
Is the robot named Maria?
The robot is pretending to be Maria.
Okay.
And then they burn Maria at the stake, and the main character's all sad about it, and then it reveals itself as the robot. And then it's like, oh, the real Maria is still alive somewhere because she's the revolutionary.
Yeah.
But, even at the time, it gained a lot of critique because it was supposed to be going against what was going on in Germany. It makes sense why this movie was made in Germany at the time because, they're just coming off of World War I. The country's in shambles. There's a rise of fascism. Everyone's losing their jobs. So it really makes sense as to why Fritz Lang wanted to tell this story that is critiquing this capitalist, oppressive world that's coming down onto Germany. But he kind of falls short in exactly the story that he wants to tell. And, to spoil the movie, at the end, another revolution happens and against this like child eating machine. And they want to stop this child eating machine, but the revolution starts a flood that would sacrifice all their children. So it's equating this child eating machine, the heart of the machine, and the workers. And the revolution stops because of the main character killing the inventor of the robot.
Yeah. And
then the whole world comes together again, the rich people and the workers, and everything just kind of continues as a status quo.
Yeah.
And it kind of like lays this like rich man's burden onto the main character. And it's just kind of ironic because Fritz Lang really wanted to tell this story that was against it. And even he kind of regretted how the movie ended in years after. Like he knew himself that he didn't really tell the story he wanted to.
Ended, there's like, it ends with text where it says something about like the mediator between the hands and the head, the working class and the elites, it's the heart.
Yes.
And it felt really, the thing is, I actually really like moral plots, and I appreciate in older movies when they're extremely explicit about who was bad and what was bad, and what was good and what was bad. But yeah, with that, I was like, wow, this is cheesy.
And it's also a silent movie. So it loses a lot of the nuance of like dialogue and everything. It's part of the German expressionist movement. So everything's very bombastic and loud, but within this like very outlandish world being the giant city. And, this giant city, at least, maybe the story kind of fell short of the criticism it wanted to alongside Art Deco, kind of like Bioshock. Well, Bioshock didn't fall short, but, it's part of there's a lineage there.
Yeah, they were both, critiques of capitalism.
Right.
Bioshock was far more explicit.
Right.
But, yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's just that the maker of Metropolis couldn't get away with, having there be a revolution because of the censors or something.
Yeah, I don't know. But the design, at least, carries on throughout cinematic history, like Terminator and Blade Runner and The Hunger Games. And maybe they lose the Art Deco style, but that idea of an oppressive, massive city, it's been here for the last 100 years because of this movie.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great one. I would love to
Yeah.
rewatch it. I just was like, wait, isn't it 3 hours? I don't have time for that right now.
Yeah. I would like to rewatch it too. It was being screened at this like small theater near my university that would play old movies and like classics and stuff. And I had never seen, like, I think they were like advertising as like, this is the most original cut available right now. And it's like pretty hard to find. So me and all my friends went to go see it. But yeah, it's a silent film. It's hard to follow. And even if it is mostly reconstructed, a lot of it is still lost. So I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah. And then to conclude, I just want to have a brief conversation about why is it that Art Deco is so popular?
Mm-hmm.
So I have a theory. I think a lot of art and design movements that hit the sweet spot between classical and modern styles are the most popular amongst the public. If you think about Impressionism, which is closer to traditional representation, that has the tiniest bit of abstraction in it. Because Impressionism, it's really like the paintings are made to look like when you initially look at something and get a first impression. That's where the name comes from. And I think artists that you see a lot in museum gift shops like Van Gogh and Frida Kahlo, they also are operating that middle ground. Art Deco, it's much farther towards abstraction and modernism, but it's the most popular architectural style amongst Americans living today. And I think that's because it doesn't abandon the fundamentals of symmetry, of beauty, and ornamentation. Like modernism that came after it, they really stopped really caring about those things. Like sometimes things would be symmetrical, but that was purely an accident. But Art Deco would always embrace the fundamentals. And yeah, I think that's why it's so popular.
Yeah. I mean, even when symmetry was being used in modern architecture, like a Mies van der Rohe building, that was just out of pure necessity of construction or, ease of.
It was just like form follows function.
Right.
Symmetry is functional.
I'm making a rectangle building, so it's going to be a rectangle. But, everything in Art Deco was so symmetrical because they cared so much about how it actually looked and how it felt. Even if it was a building, it was still a piece of art.
Yeah.
And it also just symbolizes that, like, we love to look back on a time when the future felt like it was going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe at the time they didn't even feel that way, but it's, we right now feel bad about the future. So it's like nice to look back on something that feels utopian for like the time that we're living in right now. Like, I think Metropolis takes place in the year 2000, which is maybe not too far off, but it doesn't look like that at all. It's like the Jetsons or something.
Yeah. I mean, I think in the present day, it's gotten easier to romanticize or fantasize about the past than about a future and futurism.
Right.
I can't really think of any subcultures or art movements right now that are trying to envision a future.
Right. It's hard to envision a future. I don't know why, but
yeah. Yeah.
I could probably list reasons why, but
no, I think it's like largely structural, and it has to do with market forces and the housing crisis and things like that impacting the arts. And but like, I mean, like, it's also great that it was a time when like artisans were creating art too. You talked about in the vernacular architecture episode where you have a row of two flats or whatever, and they don't look different because some architect made them look different. It was just brickworkers at the time. And everyday people.
Yeah, it was everyday people. And maybe the people designing the Art Deco buildings weren't everyday people, but the people cutting the terracotta or laying the tiles, they were. And I think that that's special too. I think that we've lost a little bit of that. Yeah.
No, that's something I was thinking about with this too, why it was popular. And I mean, shortly after this, we as a country, and I mean, most like all around the globe, I mean, there just started to be much less craftsmanship. The decorative arts that were celebrated with the 1925 Expo in Paris, who do I know that works in the decorative arts? I don't think I know anyone. I don't even think I know anyone with an Etsy shop who's like making keychains. And I went to art school.
Yeah. I know some woodworkers in Buffalo that probably get as close as possible. They like went to school for architecture, but then now they do like really beautiful woodwork and stuff.
No, I have friends who are designers. I've had like 3 friends who are fashion designers on the podcast, but I just mean in terms of like someone who can chisel like a little sculpture or something. Like there is something about Art Deco works that is like, you can't make it today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like if you're replacing a gargoyle, on a building, it's most likely to be made out of plaster because it's lighter and it's easier and it's a perfect replica of what was there before.
Yeah. You're not going to be making, like objects out of that rare metal we talked about.
Yeah, exactly. Or like getting an actual ton of granite to chisel one detail out of for like the corner of a building.
Yeah. No, it makes me sad we're missing it. But anyway.
That's why it's important to protect these things though, or like to at least care. That's why we make the podcast, to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing the episode with me this week.
Yeah. Thank you for having me again, Nathan.
Thank you. Next week's episode is going to be on rockabillys.
Nice.
So we're going to go get away from architecture finally. But yeah, I hope everyone looks forward to that. Bye.
Bye.